competition. I can assume that when it comes to competition, not a lot of people like to be on the losing end. I would assume that I am correct on this. Now, granted, in some situations, when you do take a loss, there is some grace in there, and there's also a lesson in there. But there is also a lesson for winners at times. Even though, hey, you won, there may still be a case of, oh, I could have done this better, could have done that better. Probably there were some decisions that were made that probably would not have made this situation be as close as it was, right? Because I was listening to Jordan Peterson's podcast. I listen to his interviews quite frequently because he was talking to Tim Tebow at the time, you know, and it really it made me think, and it really made me wonder because in today's day and age in society, competition seems to get bastardized a lot. Like, some people will be like, oh, but competition's unhealthy, or oh, like it leaves people to feel like excluded or something like that. And I'm like, fam, because it's happening with fighting games where they're trying to make everything more accessible to like the casual player, right? Which I can get and I understand. But usually, if you're going to make something more accessible, it comes with some sort of drawback. Like in Grand Blue Fantasy Versus, right? If you do like the easy input for special moves and everything like that, they're usually have less power towards them because you're simply just pressing a button instead of doing 236 or 214 or whatever input that you need to use. And I'm trying to figure out. Well, I know why competition is getting bastardized in the here and now. And I truly do believe that it's fucked up. Not because here's the thing, right? Because we'll get the usual spiel of like, oh, well, competition's toxic. Yeah, what I mean, and somehow people will link it to like toxic masculinity or some shit. And I'm like, I'm sorry to tell you, but motherfuckers have been in competition for eons. Even if you do try to take the competitiveness away from like whatever's going on, humans generally have a competitive nature, regardless of what you would like to put into practice or not. That's just how we are, and that's just how we're built. And it's been there since the beginning of time. Yeah, what I mean? And it's like, I get, like, you want to try to bring everyone to the same level. But the fact of the matter is, that's just not possible. Because you can't sit here and have someone who casual. Alright, so here's. Alright, so correlation. Boom. Right? When it came. Well, when it came to DFCI, right? After a certain point in time, it kind of. It plateaued, right? It peaked, so to speak. Where the higher echelon players at some point they just really didn't see or have any type of motivation to play with players that were of the lower caliber. So it would kind of be a little bit cliquish to where only the top players would only play amongst themselves. When Reignition was introduced, it was built off of the back and built off of the strength of other top players who really weren't like they still played with the top players still, but they weren't so cliquish to the point where it was just like, oh, there's no point in showing the like these other players how to get better. You know what I mean? Because it's one thing to tell people something, but it's another for them to actually be in the ring and have to adapt to what's going on. You know what I mean? And because of Reignition, players who were looked at or deemed as not worthy eventually got to a point where they could stand on the same stage as the top players. Because with competition hand in hand, there's mentorship that's involved in it. You know what I mean? Because if someone's truly competitive and you don't see anyone who's able to stand 10 toes down with you at some point, one way or another, what has to be done? Creation has to be made in order for competition to then be sustainable. So at some point, one way or another, you're gonna want to raise up another generation. That way, if you ain't got nobody within your generation to compete with you, you're gonna have to look at the next generation to be able to do that. You know what I mean? That's how it was for me in UPS when I was a sorter. You know what I mean? Because with my competitive nature, I wanted to be the best sorter on that line, point blank. That's just me. Well, am I going to win an award for it? No, but I feel hella fucking good knowing that I am the top and the best worker up in this motherfucker. You know what I mean? But with being head honcho and with being a team leader and being a team player, it also comes with sacrifice. Meaning sometimes you're gonna have to take on like, a little bit more weight. Some people don't understand what that means. That sacrifice has to be made in order for the bigger picture to be accomplished. You know what I mean? Because as the big dog, you have to sit there and be like, you know what? If I want things to go better than what they were yesterday, I'm going to have to put people in positions to where they're going to have to put in a little extra. I can help them out, but at some point in time, they're going to have to build up that moxie and that resistance, that resilience to then be able to move at this pace. Not sitting here being like, oh, just throw them to the wolves and they just going to have to. No. You're going to have to teach them how to swim first. And then, only then, over time, will they be able to dance with the wolves? You know what I mean? Now, don't get me wrong. Some competition can definitely make people toxic. And I think that's mainly just because instead of taking a step back, trying to observe what really went on, you know what I mean, and learn the lesson that's at hand that needs to be addressed, they're not trying to improve themselves, or they're not trying to have fun, or they're not doing it for the love of the game. They're doing it solely for the purpose of the win. They're so focused on the end game that they don't really see or pay attention to what's going on to reach the end point. And that, again, like I discussed yesterday, too many people are focused on the end point instead of just embracing and appreciating the journey, that middle road. You know what I mean? And it's just like how John Cena said, right? Greatness doesn't look for outside approval. When your cards are facing down At the end of the day, all you have is yourself. So you're going to have to look within yourself, quiet the noise, and really sit there and be honest with yourself and ask yourself, could I have done better? Because the answer's always going to be yes. No one has a perfect game all the time. Sometimes there may be cases where it's like you could play the best game that you could possibly play and still lose. Because there's always a new lesson that needs to be learned. There's always a little small thing that could be fixed in order to propel you to the next level. Very small things, micromanagement, that separates the boys from the men. Like, for example, with Pokemon Unite. Knowing spawn times is very important. Knowing who your priority target should be throughout the game is very important. You know what I mean? Managing your resources like your ult, when to score, when to just farm. Sometimes you just gotta let certain objectives go. That way, you and your team can become stronger and then take that team fight when they are pushing a Lecky. Sometimes when you have the advantage already up top and there's no tier 1, you might as well push tier 2. Why go push tier 1 bottom when you could help a Lecky who has 20 points? I mean, it may go down to 18 or 16 depending on how much damage that the enemy does, but why give up the Lecky so they can get experience on that thing and then get their back farm up top with tier 2 with the tier 2 pad up when you could get enough bodies to then decimate their tier 1. You can go back to that later at some point. Yeah, I mean, and fuck up their tier 2. I'm sorry, I said tier 1 earlier. But you could fuck up their tier 2. Get it down to the lowest point. And then when you get that next to Lucky, boom, quick break that. That thing is going home now. They have no choice but to stop a Lucky because now it's mandatory to stop it. Can't just let it go in now. It's mandatory to stop it now. That's, you know what I mean, when you can apply real pressure and have your foot on their neck. True competitive nature will have you think in a multitude of ways to apply pressure, when to be defensive, what the bigger picture is. And unfortunately, a lot of people want to be the main character so bad that they get lost in the sauce. And they don't know how to operate for a greater cause. And unfortunately, that's how a lot of teams fall. Empires have fallen due to the simple fact that somebody went out there for a personal goal or a personal gain that didn't benefit anyone but themselves. In fighting games, you only have you, yourself, and I. So everything lies upon you, on your ability to adapt, to condition your opponent to do whatever you need them to do, make them think that they can do something, but then you punish them. The same applies to team games like Marvel Rivals or Pokemon Unite, where you can bait and switch someone into doing something that you want them to do, condition them to target you, and then you punish them heavily because they are so invested in this personal vendetta against you that they will chase you to the ends of the earth and then they get punished, whether it just be solely by you or by you setting them up for your team to ambush them. Competition is very helpful to mold creative thinking. Competition is healthy to create an environment that will force people to really look within themselves, to then improve themselves, to have a better mind state, to make better decisions, to manage their resources better. But the problem is because people don't want to be competitive. They don't care to put that time and effort in. And then they wonder why they get stuck where they are. And then they bitch and moan that it's too difficult to do anything. When in actuality, it's not difficult to do something. It's difficult to look in the mirror and improve. But that's a different conversation for another day. Have a nice day.